So I had a pretty interesting meet experience, to say the least. Two things in preparation for this cycle that were different than the last. I was working through a pretty bad injury, and I also decided to cut a fair amount of weight. Hopefully you can learn from my experiences doing both of these things, and you can get the most out of your next training block or your next peaking cycle. So first things first, I want to talk about the cut because I did cut 7 kilos in a little over 2 weeks. I want to be, and straight away I want to deliver a disclaimer. This is my experience doing this. I'm not the best or most knowledgeable person with nutrition specifically, but this way of cutting worked for me, and it's more indicative of what I was doing prior to the cut than what I did during the cut. So first things first, I was living that super heavy life. I was about 115 kilos in Miami, which is by far the heaviest I'd ever been. After that trip, oddly enough, I decided to sign up for a meet a little over 2 weeks later, and I wanted to compete at the under 109 class. And so here is where, or the main reason why I lost a lot of weight. It was really due to the atrocious diet that I had prior to the cut. Throughout the day, I would consume anywhere from 3,500 calories, I would guess, to maybe 4,000 calories. And the thing is, like, you might think, oh, well, Zach, you're an athlete. Like, you can eat a lot of calories because you burn a lot, but the truth of the matter is I wasn't really burning that much. I was lifting heavy weights for me, and I was taking big rests. So I don't know how long I was doing this for, but it was a long time where I was in a caloric surplus and just gaining excess body fat. So when I got home, I decided to get MyFitnessPal. I decided to track my calorie intake and lower my calorie intake to 2,100 to 2,500 calories. And I know what you're thinking, right? Zach, that's what a child eats. And you're absolutely right. But I did a few things to make sure that I didn't lose muscle and that my testosterone levels didn't go down. I watched a Jeff Nippard video where he talks about how to gain muscle in a deficit, or if it's even possible, and he talks about the necessity of having a high protein diet. What he mentioned was the optimal amount of protein was 0.8 grams to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So for me, being the fat ass that I was, that was 250 grams of protein per day. So the way that I did that, I would have 3 protein shakes a day with 50 grams of protein in each one of them, and then the remaining grams of protein I would get through animal meat. Usually it was just chicken or white fish. Other than that, I would consume most of my carbs bracketed around my training, before and after training, and then a little bit less before I went to sleep. There's a really interesting post by Hayden Bowe that I saw, and it was literally during the exact time where I was cutting, and he basically says that in order to lose weight or to be on a cut, you do have to be hungry. That's just something that you have to suffer through. A lot of people stay away from this and they say, oh, you know, starving yourself is bad. Well, I'm not starving myself, but it is a deficit, and if I want to actually lose weight, I'm going to have to be hungry. That's just the nature of cutting. So for me, yeah, I was hungry a lot, but I knew that it was working, and I was getting feedback every day. I would go and I was lighter every day. So it worked really well for me. Going forward in my training, I'm obviously going to have a higher amount of training volume. When you go into a peaking phase, your training volume is a lot lower. Yes, the intensity is high, but pretty much that bulk of the volume is in strength phases and is in hypertrophy type phases prior to a peaking phase. So going forward, I've got 8 weeks until my next competition. I'm gonna have a lot more training volume, so that means I'm going to up carb intake before and after training, and even before bed, just in general, more calories. I'll probably be closer to 3,000 calories, maybe a little bit less. It just depends. Another aspect of this that's completely underrated was the fact that I was just eating cleanly, right? I was pretty much cutting added sugar out of my diet. So right there, I'm gonna lose weight. I was pretty much just staying as low fat on my protein as possible. And so right there, I was losing weight. All of these things were factors that can allow me to lose weight in a longer form than just simply cutting calories to what a child eats, kind of like I did here. So my next move is going to be maybe consume more calories, but just keep eating clean, and I still might lose weight, even though the calorie intake would be higher. And so now I want to talk about my injury, which is just my low back. It's just been bothering me like crazy. And so one thing that I did to help train, at least from the floor, was one, I just lifted lighter weights from the floor, and then two, I changed the tempo of my lift. So basically, I would push into my lower abdomen to try to stabilize my low back as much as possible, and I would just try to maintain position and move as slow as I needed to so that I wasn't out of position at all. Typically for me, I kind of just go hard off of the floor because it helps carry speed into the next portion of the pull. But when I have a slower tempo like this and I can change speed, I found that my turnaround is really a lot faster. But it is difficult to lift really slow and then go really fast with maximal weights. So for me, it was something that I had to adjust and I had to play with, and it might have actually benefited my training in a little bit. So then came the meet day. Throughout the morning, I was coaching a lot of people, and everyone hit PRs in some way. So then my session came around and I started warming up. Obviously, I was being very ginger with the low back. I was, lifting with that slow tempo off the floor. I also was lifting with a belt. For the first time ever, I decided that maybe the competition would be a good time to try a belt. These are not very smart things, but again, my mindset going into these were just like, let's test all these things out before we really peak for a singular meet. So I decided with my opening weight, I was gonna do 128. Then I went for 132. 132 went pretty well, so I decided to go for a pretty max effort 136. This definitely was the heaviest weight I could have lifted on this particular day. Being in the shape that I was, just as far as training intensity and loading going up to the competition, it was not ideal at all. And having an injury, this definitely bolsters my confidence going into snatch sessions, meaning that I don't have to train super hard in the snatch to have confidence going into meets. That's for me specifically, and so that's definite weight off my shoulders. But going into the clean, that was not the case at all. And so as you can see, that 160 was an absolute shit show. I went for 166. Lessons learned going forward. I'm gonna control my first pull a lot with lighter weights, with more volume. I'm going to add calories now as I increase my training volume. And then I'm just gonna try to be in better shape with heavier weights for the clean. I was basically just a test dummy here. This was not an ideal situation at all. I made a ton of mistakes going into this. These are things that I want to get out of the way so that when I decide to peak, I can have all of those things in a row, or at least I can try to mitigate them so that I can up my total and qualify for nationals and beyond.